was saying, here are the situationships that I saw that God provided providence in the first book of Daniel for situationships as setups for a promotional come ups. The first situationship I saw was a hitman stance, hot furnace, hot mess, hot off the press, and hot lion's breath. And we're going to do about three of them for time permission's sake. So what I saw is how God used providence to provide for them what were they going to need in situationships. And first thing was Daniel and his crew, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, had actually, along with the other wise men, a hit on their lives. And Daniel stood and actually negotiated, took a stand and negotiated with the hitman. The reason their lives were threatened and the other wise men's lives were threatened is because the king was upset because God gave to him this foretelling dream, and no one wasn't able to tell him what his dream was. The king forgot what the dream was, and he wanted the wise men to tell him what it was and interpret it. And they were like, that's too hard. So the king just sent out a death decree to say, I'm going to kill all of them. So Daniel went to the hitman and said, what's going on? Why the king made such a hasty decision to kill all the wise men? Give me a little bit of time. He went home, talked to his crew, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They prayed. God gave him the vision throughout the night. And he went to the hitman. He took him to the king. And the king said, okay, what can you do? What can you interpret and tell me what my dream was? He was able to. And after that serious situationship where their lives were threatened, he was able to interpret it, and their lives were rescued. They were spared. And actually, the king made Daniel a great man, gave him great gifts, and also made him the ruler over the province of Babylon. And Daniel was able to also share some of that rulership with his crew. Boom. There's the relationship between situationship set up for a promotional come up. Here's another one, hot furnace. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because as I spoke about, God gave them the ability to have wisdom and discernment and a strong mindset. They refused to bow the knee to the king's statue. So the king said, I'm going to throw you in a hot furnace. And he told his people, turn it up 7 times higher because they won't bow. So he threw them in there and they were bound. And the king was just like, didn't we throw 3 of them in there? But there's a 4th one in there. And he appears to be walking around like the Son of God. And that's what happens. God get in the hot furnace with us. It says in Genesis 15:17 that God is referred to as a smoking furnace and Jesus as a firing lamp. He was the fire that was in there, and God encased them in a furnace. Even though man throw you in a hot situation, God gets in there with you and rescue them. And then ultimately, since they didn't have no consuming fire on their hair or their body, they survived. The king actually promoted them once they came walking out of a firing situation that he sent them in. So he began to praise God. So they used their stance, their mindset, their skill set, and their gift set to evangelize the king. Here is the lion's breath. There was Daniel. Daniel was as the first chief ruler, and there were other princes and other rulers that were jealous. So they put up this scheme to get the king to say, in 30 days, nobody can pray to anybody but the king. So Daniel, of course, is going to keep doing what he's doing. He's going to keep praying to God. So he did. And then he had to send him to the lion's den because he broke the king's edict or the king's decree. And the king was all upset. He really loved Daniel. He really liked him. He loved his spirit of excellence. And he was like, oh, God, I hope your God can preserve you. So he threw him in the lion's den. The lion's mouth was closed by the angels. He was able to survive. He threw those who set him up, the haters, he threw them in. And when Daniel came out, the king promoted him and prospered him. So we see that there's a pattern between the setup or situationships for a come up. And our takeaway should be, and understand this, that God prepares you for situationships, and he also uses situationships as the building material to grow us up and also set us up for a promotional come up. And we have to understand, we can't call a setup for a come up as a setback for regression. It's a setup for a come up, not a setback for regression. This is Coach Moot. I'm out. Have a great week.